Welcome to ComSpark. We are live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, attending the Chief Data Officer Quality Symposium at MIT, where the world leaders in data have gathered. My name is Matthew Duremo. I am your guest host. Joining me today is Costi Tudan, Deputy CDO with DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Correct?
Correct.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right. Appreciate you spending some time with us.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, being willing to answer a few questions that we have.
Sounds good.
So how about we just jump right into it, okay?
All right.
All right, sounds good. So first, right off the list, what are some of your biggest challenges as a deputy CDO?
We have found that the biggest challenge we're facing is a cultural challenge as opposed to a technology challenge. Our organization being a very heterogeneous organization, we have found that a lot of the systems that are usually collecting data have been developed independent of each other, so they're in silos. I'm sure this is not something new to anyone. The silos of data exist in all enterprises. So changing the culture around how the data is collected and how the data is stored and how it is used is what is the hardest part. And we have to do that through always going out and advocating for opening up data, adoption of standards for standard information exchanges, so that we make data more available to the analysts and to the folks that are trying to put data together that crosses the so-called mission silos.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I got to think a lot of that is specific to gearing the data in the correct manner based off that cultural reform so that the user obviously ingest that in a better way,
right.
In a better light, right?
Yeah, and also teaching or trying to improve data literacy in our organization to teach people who collect data to document the data sufficiently so that people who are not necessarily close to the mission that the data was collected for can understand what the data was collected for and see how it might be useful for their own analysis.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of cultural change, right? Data, in the days before was primarily a number out of accounting or a characteristic of marketing, right? So with cultural change now in data, I guess what does data mean to you going forward?
Well, I'm a data geek, so to me, data will always be an abstraction of reality that helps us model and do prediction or any other analytics. But I think we have seen a sea change in the way data is perceived in enterprises. Data is, as I'm sure you've heard during the conference here, is spoken as a data asset to the enterprise. It is a strategic asset in my view, and I think it's going to become more and more important to look at it that way and to make it part of the C-suite level conversation,
sure.
As an asset to the enterprise. So data remains what it was initially, but it also has become a strategic asset for the enterprise, no matter how big or small that enterprise is. A lot of the companies are more and more dependent on the digital pieces of their operations, so data is essential to their success.
Sure, understood. So I guess what is the future vision for data then looking forward?
This is a question we can answer, thinking in terms of what we know about our technology and about where we're going with technology. Or we can answer this in terms of science fiction and kind of think in terms of what we'd like our data to do for us. I think regardless of how we look at it, a big change that we will see in not too distant future is a bigger focus on ethical use of data. I think that's going to be a changing dynamic in the data space. There's lots and lots of articles, and there's a proliferation of blogs and books and all of that about the use of data and analytics. And a lot of them talk about the importance of ethical use for data. So I think that is, in essence, one of the biggest impacts that we will see in the next few years, I think.
Sure, and I got to think with that ethical piece in mind, correlating right next to it is going to be more stringent controls and processes around compliance and data regulatory.
Absolutely, yeah. And I would suspect that alongside implementing ethical principles. I think we'll see potentially regulatory type approaches. We all know we have that already for the financial industry and some of the healthcare industry. I wouldn't be surprised to see that for our social media companies. We've seen a lot of conversations around misuse of data during the last election cycle for influencing voter and other misuses or somewhat unethical uses of data. So I think we'll see some of the ethical principles, and they may not become regulatory in terms of legislation or in terms of federal government agencies regulating the use of data in those spaces, but it will be a voluntary participation by companies as good stewards of their data and of people's information.
Sure. Well, I couldn't agree more, and I greatly appreciate the insights that you shared with us.
Well, thank you very much.
Again, thank you so much for your time today.
Very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. So for more on today's interview, please visit ComSpark.tech.